Sometimes we humans take for granted the very quiet, unheralded profession of print journalism. There are folks who do the daily hard work of seeking out information and holding people in power accountable for their actions. The print journalists don't get the same attention as the broadcast journalists, but they are the true backbone of fact-finding. My next guest is author and journalist Claudia Dreifus, one of the hardworking reporters working behind the scenes. She has been a consistent contributor through numerous print publications and digital outlets, including the New York Times, New York Review of Books, Quanta, and CNN. She has won numerous awards and citations for her science writing, her amazing interviews, and her coverage of women's issues. She is beloved and respected by her colleagues and also works to impart journalism skills to grad students at Columbia University. She is known as a gifted interviewer and someone who has made scientific information and progress accessible to all.
You are watching Profunda TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
Claudia, it is such a pleasure to get to talk with you again. You're a fellow journalist who I knew from years and years ago, but I am delighted to have witnessed your remarkable career. In talking with you, I would just love to get your thoughts, whatever they are, about the direction journalism and broadcast journalism have taken today. I mean, it feels like a very different world than when you and I started in the field.
Well, indeed, it's a very different world. I think we both were pioneers for women in our time, when there weren't very many women with public voices, and when just to be in public and to have a voice was a revolutionary act almost. Because, the public square wasn't as much a male public square as football is. And women didn't have much authority. And I remember watching you on TV, Phyllis, and thinking, she's doing it. She's speaking up. She's being heard. And how important that was.
The news. Do you feel a sense of loss in the business of news?
Absolutely.
What are your observations?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we know is that when authoritarianism takes over, there's less news. And if you go to authoritarian countries, there are very few newspapers, there's state-controlled television. And I fear that for a variety of reasons, we in America are becoming that, because as you know, it's no big news to explain that, news is getting more limited. Our news sources are more limited. When we think of some of the great things that journalism did in its time, which includes coverage of the civil rights movement, which includes Watergate, and coverage of the Vietnam War, there was so much more then than there is now. I think one of the reasons why the response to the shooting war that we're all in the middle of now is so limited is news sources are limited, and getting more consolidated. And this isn't just the work of authoritarianism. It's who want to control what we all read and think, but it's also kind of a silent process that technology has brought on, that economic consolidation there's so many fewer newspapers there than there were when we were starting out. There are really only three major ones now. Local communities don't have newspapers, and television news is sadly, even the people who see themselves as news channels are more talk than they are news. Uh, I'm shocked that whenever I watch CNN or MSNBC, that they're mostly interviewing each other. They're not going out and getting direct news themselves. They're interviewing other correspondents from the stations, or they're interviewing reporters from the Times or the Wall Street Journal who are covering the stories, but they're not going out in the field and getting those stories. And that's a great loss. I'm not so much interested in journalists covering each other. And so much of it is just opinion rather than direct news. We need to know what's happening in our society, what's happening at the nitty-gritty grassroots levels. And MSNBC or its successor, sometimes they do that well, but sometimes they just totally fall down on the job and you feel like they're lazy, that they don't have any producers or something, but they're just not, they're just interviewing the same people and awfully often each other.
So you are a writer with real experience, and you definitely um, survived this industry for many, many years and continue to write. What is it that keeps you going? What is your inspiration, despite the nature of the business, that keeps you contributing?
Well, I think, yeah, well, let me tell a story. I was in a jury pool some years ago, and one of the other women in the jury pool said to me, "Well, you're very proud of being a journalist, aren't you?" As if, I was got engaged in some nefarious, awful work. And I said, "You bet I'm proud. We're the foot soldiers of the First Amendment, and we are. We give people good information by which they can make good decisions and be a part of society." And, I'm a second generation American. My family were refugees. And so I grew up understanding the preciousness of democracy and wanted to participate in a way that I could. And telling true stories about the world we live in is my way. I'm not a good political organizer. I'm a terrible political organizer. My first job out of college was I was a union organizer for 1199 Drug and Hospital Workers of New York. And I did that because I wanted to stay in the civil rights movement and stay connected to civil rights work. But I was the world's worst union organizer, really bad at it. And yeah. Somebody in my family is sick right now, and they go to NYU Hospital, and I keep on saying to this person when I visit them, "I know this hospital. I used to organize here, but not successfully. I know these hallways. I used to hide out in the bathroom and give leaflets to people as they came." Um,
Well, well, let's go back before that, because um, there's a remarkable photograph of you in a among freedom fighters and the civil rights movement. How did you get involved in that? What drew you to being part of that change in our world? What pulled you there?
Well, so the date of the photograph is April 6, 1963, which turns out to be the same day as the day that people were being doused by water cannons in Birmingham, and those pictures that we all know of people being bitten by police dogs. That was going on that day. And that day I went with people from Brooklyn Core and NYU Core, Congress of Racial Equality, to Maryland to integrate restaurants in a rural town which was famous for being sort of a Klan center. I was 18 I didn't tell my parents because they wouldn't have approved, not that they disapproved of being involved in the civil rights action, but they were Holocaust survivors. They were survivors of the Nazi regime, and they were terrified of arrest or saying no to authority. So I just didn't tell them. I was a freshman in college. I said I was staying over at a girlfriend's house, and I hopped on the bus. The thing that drew me was my family's background, because I could see the clear link between what happened to Jewish people in Germany and the way Blacks in the US were being treated. And the links are very strong. My Aunt Inge, who arrived in America in 1938 from Cuba, where she had escaped from Berlin to Cuba, on the ship immediately before the San Luis. So if she had taken one ship later, as her father had urged her, she wouldn't have gotten here. Anyway, my Aunt Inge had to stay in Cuba for a few weeks and then took the ferry to Miami. And she got off the ferry and she sat down on a bench, and she immediately saw that she had sat down on the wrong bench in Florida in the 30s. And she thought, oh my God, this is just like home. She had sat down on the black bench. And that's welcome to America for the first member of my family to be able to escape and come here. Well, I've never forgotten that, even though I was born here. I've never forgotten my Aunt Inge's story. And for me, it's always been very vivid and clear that a commitment to human rights, wherever they are, has to be central to who I am, because I was born in the middle of the war. If I'd been born in Europe, I wouldn't have lived. A million Jewish babies were murdered that year. Well, not that year, but throughout those years. And I'm keenly aware of that. It's an obligation. It's an obligation to make the world fairer, safer, more just.
Yeah, and we should also, the audience should remember that being part of the civil rights movement did take the lives of freedom riders, Andrew Goodman among them. So there were people who sacrificed. You were taking quite a risk, even though maybe at 18 you didn't know how much of a risk you were taking.
Well,
But there were
I
people.
knew it was dangerous. And
You
you
knew
know,
it was dangerous?
yeah, and when we got off the bus, there were police dogs there. And I kept on saying to myself, don't look at the dogs. Yeah, just walk past them. And there, you know, in that series of photographs, which I found online, which are done by a famous photographer. But I was trying to research what had happened that day because, it's a long time ago. You don't remember a lot of things. And I'm writing a memoir or not writing a memoir. I'm writing a memoir in theory. And I thought I'd chomp around the internet and see if I could find any record of that day. And I found these photographs, and there's a picture of me going up against these people with the most racist signs, and I'm just standing right next to them. I don't think you're so afraid in the moment anyway, when you're doing the right thing. But a certain amount of fear is healthy.
A certain amount of fear is healthy, but you were really in the midst of it. So, given your
I was a kid.
predilection, you were a kid, 18 as a kid, but given your concern about human rights and your love for excellent journalism, what do you tell your students now in the world they are preparing? Because you are teaching.
Yeah, I
Uh,
teach at Columbia.
yeah. So
Yeah.
so what are you telling them now about where they should focus or how they should operate in this environment?
Well, for one thing, I tell them to have a day job. That it was always very hard to make a living at what we do, and you worked in television, which was a little better, but I worked in print, which was never a good living and hasn't been since the 1930s, maybe. Um, and I say that, if you want to do this, You have to do what actors do, which is have a day job and have that pay the rent, because this is not going to pay the rent. The price of writing has gone down enormously since the internet. Um, a lot of people that I used to write for that paid, livable money don't pay anything at all now. I won't mention a national magazine of enormous quality and well thought of, where I published before. And they published a piece by my husband and I on college costs. And it was the most uh, shared piece that year of all their stories. And when they accepted it, I never, the editor was away on vacation, and I never bothered to negotiate a price. But when they came back from vacation, I said, let's talk about the fee. And they said, oh, we don't pay fees for stories anymore. Um, you're getting exposure for your book. And these people used to pay about $1,200, dollar a word. And
Sure.
yeah, and that's not great, but they are not doing it anymore. And they're doing fine financially, by the way. So it's not a good living. They're just there just aren't a lot of markets that pay anything. Um, so I tell my students they should write because they love it and because it's important, but they should also have another way of paying the rent. Paying the rent is not a minor thing.
Well, that is an excellent point about the change as a result of the internet. Now we're confronted with AI and
Yeah,
so much misinformation. I'm just worried that not only are we losing our freedoms, but we're losing uh, our access to truth. That there's a way to manipulate information so easily, and if we
yeah.
live in, you know,
The other day, after the revelations about Cesar Chavez came out, I wanted to find my 1975 interview with Cesar Chavez, and it appeared in Newsday, which doesn't have a library that's online, at least not that far back. I don't know, they may have more recent. And so I uh, I asked AI if they could find my story uh, on the internet and direct me. And they said, this story is not on the internet in full. And then they had some biography of me, and they said I was a respected, well-known interviewer who had interviewed, among other people, Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, I've never interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu. Where did they get that from? I mean, it's ridiculous.
right? So AI was hallucinating, as they
Yeah,
say.
yeah. I mean, I found it amusing, but at least they thought I was important.
But the students that you work with, you're telling them that they have to check and double check. They can't rely
Yeah.
on AI for information
Not
to
only
be
can they
accurate.
not rely on it, but they shouldn't rely on it to do their writing for them, which has happened. And what I say to them is, you learn to write by yourself, to form stories by yourself, to build the structure yourself, because when you're out in the work world, you're going to be the only person who knows how to do this. And that's going to give you a tremendous advantage. But I must say my students are highly motivated. They work hard. They file on time, um, and they want to learn what I have to teach them. It's a very gratifying experience. I mean, and when I hear people complain about students, it kind of makes me angry, because I think they're not motivating the students enough. That's the problem. Don't blame the kids.
So we've talked about this topic from the perspective of the journalist and the writer, but what should the ordinary citizen do right now if they are interested in finding truth? what is your behavior when you are looking up information, and what should the ordinary person do who's lost maybe their local newspaper?
Well, I think support various media efforts. Sometimes I do a piece and people online say, oh, there's a paywall behind it. And I want to say to them, pay, because that's what supports the stuff that you want to read. Real copy, not opinion. Real investigation requires money. So I think you can support, for instance, local media that's developing online. In Mississippi, for instance, some of the reporters like Jerry Mitchell, who worked and won Pulitzer Prizes for his investigations in the Clarion Ledger, went out and formed a new news service that they call Mississippi Today, and that covers local news. And that's happening in a lot of communities. In New York, we have the Gothamist, we have the City, which is taking up the place of relatively poor local coverage that we have. But New York is actually better off than a lot of places because we have, for better or worse, at least 3.5 regular papers. And very few of them cover local news well enough. But I think when there are things, I send a check to the Gothamist. I think we all need to do that because we need to support outfits like ProPublica that are, or the Marshall Project. There's an interesting group of people who've done work on gun control and gun control media called The Trace. That kind of reporting, they're still doing it. I also think we need to let media, mainstream media as it's called, know when they start collapsing to pressure from the government that we don't like it. And that works. I mean, think about the Jimmy Kimmel incident or experience. When people said, we don't like your canceling Jimmy Kimmel, Disney stepped back. And, what's happening at the Washington Post right now, it's tragic. But people are voting with their feet and saying, we don't like your abandonment of your mission. And it's a complicated situation. When they first started changing their editorial policies, like many people, I quit my subscription. But then I thought, there's still good journalism going on there, and I need to support it. So I took out a subscription again. But the editorials are so awful and meaningless, and when they have meaning, it's not a good meaning. And they fired so many good people or forced them into retirement that or elsewhere, that the evisceration of the Washington Post is just a tragedy. We need them in Washington, and God knows that Bezos can afford it. He can afford to lose money. So it doesn't even cost one of his spare yachts, but who are we to tell him how to live?
Yes, he could really save his image by restoring the quality to the Washington Post, because right now big tech and big corporate are under the gun, and right now they need kind of a boost. So that's an excellent recommendation. Is there anything I have not asked you that you would like to share before we say goodbye?
Well, I've got to tell you, as an interviewer, I'd rather be asked questions than volunteer. So you ask good questions, Phyllis, and I just would urge people not to be bowled over by the difficult circumstances we're all living in, and to keep participating, not to be afraid. Fear is our enemy. maybe the feelings I had when I got off the bus in Westminster, Maryland, and there were yapping police dogs, big German shepherds. And I said to myself, keep going. Just don't look at them. Just keep going. Well, we need to do that, all of us, every day.
Well, as my friend, even though we haven't been in touch for years and years and
Yeah.
years, I want to say thank you for your contribution to the field and most of all to my personal freedom. So thank you, really.
Thank you, and thank you for your pioneering work. You were always a shining example.
Thank you, Claudia.